Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me at the Singapore Book Fair online. I'm Stephanie Suga Chen, author of the Straits Times bestselling novel, Travails of a Trailing Spouse, and the just recently released follow-up sequel, Disunited Nations, International School Mums at War. And both published by Straits Times Press, and they're both available for purchase at stbooks.sg. And actually, right now they're running a promo, so they're all both 10% off as part of the Singapore Book Fair online specials. So definitely check those out. And if you're a Kindle reader like me, you can download them also at Amazon.com. I'm thrilled to be here today to read from Disunited Nations and tell you a little bit about my adventures in local schooling, international schooling, unschooling, more about that later, and of course now homeschooling. And I'll be taking questions later on. So if you are on the Singapore Book Fair Facebook page watching this live stream, you can enter in the comments any questions, and I will try to get to as many as I can later on in just a little bit. For those of you who might not know me, you could probably tell from my accent that I was born and raised in the United States, but my parents immigrated there from Taiwan in the 70s. And in 2012, I moved with my family, my husband and my two kids, to Singapore. And I came as a so-called trailing spouse. And so I guess that term, if you're not familiar with it, is that my husband is the one who got the job in Singapore, and I sort of trailed after him. So I turned my first few experiences in as an expat wife into the novel Travails of a Trailing Spouse. And the second book, Disunited Nations, is focused more on the kids, and third culture kids is what they're known as. And the inspiration obviously came from raising my own children, but also more specifically actually at an event that I did in Taipei for Travails a couple summers ago. It was a really lively group. We got into a discussion about our children and what effect living abroad has had on our children. And a lot of people like myself had some concerns, what kind of, would they grow up without a sense of country, a sense of having a home, even having a sense of belonging. And so there was a woman who was originally from Malaysia, but she had spent most of her life abroad. And she said some words that just really touched me and sat with me for a little bit, and actually was the inspiration for this book. And what she said was, instead of roots, I gave my children wings. And I just thought that was such a great sentiment, and really did grow into this novel. And so if you're watching, Miss Yu Kong, thank you so much. I did acknowledge you also in the back of the book. So I thought I would start reading from the book for you guys, since this is actually my first promo event. Unfortunately, our launch event at the main Kinokuniya store in Singapore has to be postponed. So I will be reading from, I'd start right at chapter 1, which is called The Children. Answering the question, where are you from, always gave them pause. The little ones usually said, Singapore, before being corrected by their parents, if they happened to be present when the question was asked. Older ones said something along the lines of, I'm American, but I'm currently living in Singapore. Or my parents are Australian/French and British/Japanese, and we've lived all over. Oh, so complicated, was often the response by the questioner. They're citizens of the world, parents defended. Instead of roots, they have wings. They were a breed of their own, these kids, the children of expats, or third culture kids, as coined by sociologists. Identifying with neither the culture of their parents nor the country in which they were actually living, they inhabited a separate culture altogether, the nebulous world of international schools, mixed nationalities, and blended identities. They often carried multiple passports, although many were born abroad and had never stayed in the country identified by these passports for more than a month or two. Indeed, by the time they graduated from high school, many of these TCKs would have lived in half a dozen countries, spending one December holiday in the hot summer of Auckland and another in the icy winter of Toronto. They celebrated Christmas, Lunar New Year, Hari Raya, and Deepavali, recited their phone numbers with the country code first, and considered a flight from Singapore to Tokyo short. In Singapore, they were often members of the wealthy elite, enjoying the services of helpers and drivers, flying first class, paid for by a parent's employer, spending spring breaks skiing in Hokkaido or diving in the Maldives. For some, Singapore was just one stop out of a long list of international postings. They complained of not having a hometown, of not fitting in anywhere, of losing friends over and over again. Their cultural identities were blurred. They had accents that were vaguely American, but yet called an elevator a lift and a garage a car park. They could identify Sri Lanka on a map, tolerate the smell of durian in small doses, navigate a night market in Taipei, and strike up a conversation with just about anyone in the world. But ultimately, when probed, they would admit they felt most comfortable with other TCKs. They considered nowhere and yet everywhere home. And of course, as with children all over the world, their parents worried about them. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of what the book is about. So in it, Sarah Lee, who is an expat in Singapore, who we met in Travails, struggles with deciding what is the best system of education for her young children. And she starts in the local system, but a school cheating incident involving her daughter influences her to make a change to international school, which, however, comes with its own issues. So now I'm going to read a section from chapter 13 when Sarah's children actually start at international school. In the middle of this local environment, standing out like an oasis in a desert, was the International School of Singapore, one of Singapore's premier international schools, and in fact, one of the top-ranked schools in the world. Founded in 1966, just a year after Singapore's independence, TIS's alumni included world leaders, prominent businessmen and women, Olympic athletes, and even an Oscar-winning actor. The school's main building featured a huge open atrium, which featured flags of the 85 countries represented by its student body, strung from the ceiling. Its campus, situated on 36 acres and including 4 swimming pools, an air-conditioned sports arena, an outdoor discovery park, and a 700-seat theater, was what was the single largest K-12 school campus in the world. TIS also boasted Singapore's longest waitlist, and its application required essays to be submitted by both the applicant and his or her parents on what contributions they felt they could each make to the school. Sarah had felt like they had gotten extremely lucky, and both kids were excited to be attending this big, fancy school with the giant fish tank in the front office. Then they all went to new student orientation, and Sarah discovered where the money to pay for that shiny fish tank came from. Everything, literally everything, cost money, and lots of it. Uniforms, unlike in the local school where they had cost $20 for the whole outfit, were $40 just for the PE shirt. 2 sets of regular uniforms and PE outfits for Ruby and Eric set them back nearly $500. In addition to the uniforms, the kids needed hats, water bottles, hoodies, and even waterproof library bags. Then came the extracurricular activities, each costing $30 a class and dozens offered, ranging from inline skating to magic lessons. Next was the IT table. Ruby needed an iPad, the latest model, of course, custom loaded with a slew of educational apps and parental controls. Added to that an industrial-grade shock-proof case, and the grand total came to over $1,200. After stopping by a few more of the orientation stations, Sarah felt like she should just give the school full access to her bank account and let them withdraw out of it without her feeling the pain of every charge. There was even a station for the school's giving fund where parents could actually auto-debit from their bank account on a monthly basis if they were so inclined. They went to the canteen where Ruby was shown how she could buy lunch using her school ID, which Sarah needed to charge up in advance. There was an array of choices: Western, Asian, gluten-free, vegetarian, halal, all organic, non-processed, non-GMO, and carefully crafted by an award-winning chef. The average cost? $12 per lunch, and that did not include a drink. $12, Sarah said. That's 20 times as expensive as at local school. After inserting her credit card yet again to load lunch money onto Ruby's card, Sarah said to Jason with a sigh, "I'm afraid to take a breath of air here. Will we get billed for that too?" So after Sarah's kids settle into the international school, she falls into a group of international school moms. And as the title of the book suggests, she starts battling against the queen bee of the PTA, which quickly turns very ugly and actually escalates into a school-wide scandal. So she ends up she actually ends up starting to question her own cultural identity and sense of belonging. And she ends up withdrawing her kids and unschooling. So unschooling, you're probably wondering, what is that? Although now with these days with homeschooling, maybe it's become a little bit more front and center. But unschooling is a system of schooling in which the children don't actually go to school and they're not homeschooled either, but they're what's called child-led. And that means that they learn on their own, self-directed through their own life experiences, doing household chores, and actually their own sort of intellectual curiosity. So that's the theory, actually. In practice, I'm not sure how it really works, although we did do it for a spell. And so I think, that's something that probably people are challenged with right now, having their kids at home. So we've been busy, I'm sure, like along with the rest of the world, having school, homeschooling. We're doing tons of jigsaw puzzles and board games. The kids are making movies and, of course, lots of video conferencing with their friends and family. So right now, I will try to take some questions from the group. So if you are on the Facebook stream, you can ask a question in the comments and we'll have the moderator pop them up onto the screen. And I'll see how many I can get to. How did you research the unschooling part of the book? It sounded very detailed. Great question. So as I mentioned, my own kids did experience a local schooling, international schooling, and a bit of unschooling. And so I actually found out there's a scene in the book that actually is from my real life where I found out that one of my friends was unschooling her children. And I said, "What is that?" And she actually added me onto a Facebook group that has actually like 20,000 group members. So quite a big group, and really learned what people were doing. And there are various reasons why parents decide to do that. Sometimes it's because they're not responding well to traditional schooling. Sometimes there's an issue going on, or they're just bored at school. And I've really been fascinated with watching her, and she posts a lot about what her kids do. A lot of times they'll, just cooking dinner, cooking breakfast, building things, making games and selling them, putting them online and actually selling them in the App Store. So I did have a little bit of personal experience, and also just from friends and doing a little bit of research online. Should we try the next question? So did you hold back on including things that really happened to your family or friends, especially embarrassing encounters or character traits, in case they recognize themselves in the book? This is a funny question. So this book, because it was my second one, I think I felt just more experienced and a little bit more had more courageous to just invent things. So a lot of it is made up. Most of it is fiction, really. But it's a good question. I think strangely, most people don't recognize themselves. And people that aren't in the book will say, meet strangers that will say, "Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about. That person lived in my building," or, "This is my school." They'll think that they're in it. And then the people who actually were based off of real people don't recognize themselves at all. So it's a very interesting experience whenever I'm talking to people. What's next for you? Are you writing a third book? Oh, that's great. I hope so. I hope to do a third book, I should say. I had always sort of envisioned this after I wrote the first one. I figured that it would be a trilogy, kind of like Crazy Rich Asians. So that really would be my goal. I'm thinking that the third book would involve Sarah and her family moving back to the U.S. and kind of the challenges with repatriation and that. So hopefully, if the second book does well, I'll get a chance to do that. In the meantime, though, I have been writing another book. It's actually a young adult book, so it's focused on teens. And I actually was just signed with a literary agent, Emily Keyes of Fuse Literary, to put out that book and hopefully help me sell and publish that one. So definitely stay tuned for that. How much of the book is true? Everybody loves asking that question. I think with the first one, especially because the husband gets arrested, it's a really question people love to ask. And so my kind of standard answer for that one was it's 50% true. And you can kind of guess which 50%. This one, I will go out and say it's probably only 25% true. As I did say, my kids did do local schooling, international schooling, a little bit unschooling. They did attend a wilderness school at one point. But the drama and all of that stuff is quite fictional. I did, however, climb Mount Kinabalu, which is the title of chapter 12. And my daughter was involved in a really teeny lunch money embezzlement scheme, in which is featured in chapter 5. Let's see if there are any other questions, or I could take the next one. Oh, how can I buy the book? Oh, great question. It was on the screen a little bit, but stbooks.sg is the Straits Times Press site, and they are open now and shipping. Oh, there we go. And actually, both books are available, and they are, like I said at the beginning, they are 10% off through the middle of June as part of the Singapore Book Fair. So definitely check those out, and it's available on Amazon as well. Now, after Circuit Breaker is lifted, which hopefully is soon, it is available at all major bookstores in Singapore. So Kinokuniya, Popular, Times, and W.H. Smith at Changi Airport. How are you staying sane during circuit breaker at home with your kids? Very good question. How am I staying sane? Do I look sane to you? So I think for me, staying sane is a schedule, which we really try to keep to. Oh, and we have a little public service announcement too before I answer that. If you're unwell, please stay home. Except if you need to go see the doctor. Okay, so we keep a schedule. We try to get up around the same time every day. Go for a run, get some sun, really get out of the house with observing safe social distancing, of course. And then the morning the kids have school, and then in the afternoon we try to have some structure around it, even if it's like 12 to noon. Let mommy have alone time, that kind of thing. And then, I think getting outside really is a big deal. The other thing that I've actually done, I'm sure a lot of you have been doing a lot of group Zoom calls, having your whole family, seeing birthday parties and, 9 or 10 or 20 people across the screen, and it can get really overwhelming. And so for me, what I've been doing actually is one-on-one video conference, which has been really fun and something that I've never obviously done before. But having a friend, maybe somebody I haven't talked to, or somebody that I do talk to regularly, and just one with that person and a cup of coffee, and I found that a really nice way to just connect and not feel overwhelmed by having a whole bunch of people sitting on a video conference. And I would say the last thing is is taking naps. And I'll admit that I love taking naps, and sleeping is a great way to boost your immunity. So I've been doing that a lot, actually. It's a scheduled event almost every day. So I'd highly recommend that. I have a comment on here. Hi there. You also need to investigate school bus fares. Oh, yes. School bus fares were very expensive, as I can recall. Yeah. We have any other questions? If not, let's see. Oh, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? Oh, okay. Um, if you've heard any of my other talks, I think I wasn't a writer by profession. I had a long career in finance and banking and investing. And when I moved to Singapore, I actually I had quit my job and was looking for something new. And it took me a few years before I really started to actually write my first word. But I discovered two amazing writing groups in Singapore. One of them is the Singapore Writers Group, and the other was a writing group that's part of the American Women's Association of Singapore, the AWA. And both those groups, actually, I acknowledge in my latest book, but were just incredibly supportive and helpful in my publishing journey. First of all, writing can be very solitary, and you really have to be disciplined. And you don't have a team of people or even a boss that you can go to ask for advice. And so, this writing groups not only would help you improve your writing, but also keep you on task and give you advice. And there's a lot of other experienced writers that will be able to help you along your journey. So I'd say that would be my number one piece of advice, is joining a writers group. And then secondly, I would say just write as much as you can. How much time do you need to complete a book? I'm a fast writer, and I think once I discovered that I really enjoyed writing, and there's actually a whole story behind this. If I go back to sixth grade, when I was deciding or talking to a guidance counselor about what I wanted to do, I actually had set a writer, but 20 years went by, and I sort of forgot that, and I went on my other career path. And so 5 years ago, when I started writing this book, and I started writing it, actually the words just came out very, very quickly, because I think it had been pent up there, that it was something that I really was passionate about, but I just hadn't actually done it yet. So I wrote actually Travails of a Trailing Spouse in 5 weeks, which is pretty short for a book. And I think everything came out. Now editing is a whole nother story. I think it took myself and Jill Lim, my editor at Straits Times Press, about 5 months to edit that. So it gives you a little sense of the timeline. Disunited Nations, I actually started the summer that I was promoting. I was actually still sort of promoting travails, and there were some things that were fresh in my mind, so I wanted to write them down. And then I left it for a little bit, and then at the beginning of last year, I sat down to really write that, and that took about probably another 2 months. So I'm a pretty fast writer, but again, the editing process is the long part, and that can be quite challenging, because it's just a different skill set. It's, instead of being creative, it's really being analytical and technical, and making sure that everything works and makes sense. Who are some of your favorite authors or books? Oh, that's great. Gosh, so many good ones. I really love The Immigrant Experience. So I have read Jhumpa Lahiri is one of my favorite authors. She wrote The Namesake. I love big family epic novels. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Isabel Allende are two that I love. I read a lot of light fiction, I call it, beach reads, which I would put these in categories. So sort of the Jennifer Wieners and, Shopaholic and Bridget Jones' Diary, that kind of books. I also really enjoy um, recently kind of the more young adult books they're streaming more to adults. John Green, The Fault in Our Stars was a great book that I loved, and then kind of the more mystery slash suspense I also enjoy, like Gone Girl. So a big variety. And I also am one of those people that has like 8 books on their Kindle right now. And I sort of read one, when I'm sort of, oh, okay, I need to change the pace, then I'll read the other one. And so I'm constantly probably have a lot of books open right now. What do you think about Steinbeck? Overrated. I really loved Of Mice and Men. I think that was great. I got to be honest, though, I haven't read Steinbeck in a long time, but it's probably worth looking at right now, given the state of the world. I'm trying to see if these are. I'm getting some really fun comments. Thank you very much. If I think we're heading on 29 minutes, so I think we have 30 minutes planned. So we'll see if there's any other questions. Have you always known deep inside that you wanted to become a writer? Yeah, that was what I was talking about. I think I did, but I forgot, which is a weird thing to say, but I really go back, and they say, go back to what you loved to do when you were a kid. And I can remember in 5th grade writing tons of stories, and journaling and doing all that. And I remember having this distinct conversation with my guidance counselor in 6th grade where he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A writer." And he said, "What kind of job will you get?" And it was my first realization that, wanting to be something was a job, and you needed to, there were jobs that went into, you had to actually, being a writer wasn't necessarily a job. And then I don't know if it was because of that or, whatever, I sort of went off on a different path. And then a few years ago, says, about 30 years after that conversation, I was sitting and looking at Facebook, and there was a call for writers that came up, and it was call for essays for, the theme was in betweenness, so feeling in between cultures. And given that I'm an Asian American, but now living in Singapore, I really thought, wow, that's really speaking to me. And so I started writing. And then after I had written a bunch of essays and then this book, I actually thought back to that conversation I had in 6th grade. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, it probably was deep inside. But it took like a spark to get it out. We just had a PSA that went below there. In case you didn't see that, it was just a reminder to wash your hands a lot. Okay, looks like we're out of time, but I just want to say thank you for tuning in. And there's definitely a lot of other writers that are being part of the Singapore Book Fair online through next Monday, I believe, both in English and Chinese. So definitely check out that schedule. Again, the books, Travails of a Trailing Spouse and Disunited Nations, International School Moms at War, both available at stbooks.sg. Just a reminder to practice safe distancing, wear masks, and wash your hands. Thank you so much.